Hi, here is a little bit of thinking about my preparation for the upcoming episode 1 of our Primetime Adventures game. And you can see, and make of it what you will, the heinously little scribbled notebook page that I have. Page crazy as it may seem, and kind of is. For the reminder, this is the game that we're playing. So let's take a look at what I've got. I'm going to have to, group up stuff that's scattered all over the page. First is procedural issues. I think it's probably clear from the session that we need to review the fan mail cycle, and specifically the difference between giving someone fan mail, which is to say pulling from the audience pool, so now a person has a fan mail token sitting in front of them, versus spending fan mail, which is what you do with fan mail that you have sitting in front of you. Especially if you're spending it for someone else, the terminology between the two is very difficult to convey by voice through the screens when you don't actually have tokens like sitting in front of you and just moving them from place to place, which is incredibly intuitive. Well, anyway, so we'll review that, and that's fine. I don't anticipate difficulties. The thing that might be slightly more important, actually, if you can believe it, has to do with scene making, not in terms of content, which is the usual bugaboo about Primetime Adventures. They were fine about that. I mean, first person who jumped in making a scene, was following the rules of the game without even knowing them. And the important thing I want to talk about, however, is that each person is going to be able to set a location and populate it with whoever they want as soon as their turn comes around, which in our game basically means is when you kind of go, ooh, me. And the important point about this is that if you start a situation and conflicts start to emerge, then that means that basically the audience pool is going to be filling. There is a mechanical incentive to impose conflict into situations. And with this group and in this particular setting, I don't see a problem with worrying about whether they're going to be forced in or sort of meaninglessly imposed. I don't think that's really the issue. What I want people to understand is that we don't know what conflicts are going to emerge. And so when they place a character and say, well, this is what they're doing, that it's sort of opening the door for whatever conflicts may emerge. And that's kind of an interesting, soft technique of the game that is very, very powerful and very uncontrived. So you basically have to say to yourself, well, I'd like to see this person in that situation, and who knows where that's going to go. And so the more they do that, then the more the audience pool fills. So this is kind of an interesting detail about this, which is who gets to be there. I checked out the rules carefully. And so say I'm starting a scene, I will say who's there. It's kind of implied heavily, never stated outright, that your protagonist will be in it. And I suppose we might as well accord with that. It is, sort of related to It's My Go. But the important thing is that who else is there is also stated by that person, and any other player can have their character basically walk in. Now, there is something about paying fan mail to do that, but what's interesting is that you pay fan mail to veto when the producer says you can't. So I consider that an edge case that would, almost certainly never arrive. I mean, if I know that the player can veto it, then why bother saying no? Why bother saying no in the first place? Anyway, the point is that I don't really see that as an issue. The point is that people should know that they can put other player characters into their situations, and also that it's perfectly okay to say, and I'm strolling by, or I'm sitting there too, as the scene opens. So those are some important points, along with the other conflict-oriented point that the producer is the only person at the table who is obliged to introduce conflict, and that is to say the formal conflict mechanics, to any scene in play. There's this sort of built-in contradiction of, oh, well, we got to have lots of conflicts and we got to fill that audience pool and we got to conflict. And then this point that we really ought to focus on, which is we just don't have to. We can just go scene to scene and, see what's going on. That also leads to an important point of there's nothing wrong with short scenes. There's nothing wrong with short ones with or without conflicts, but things that arise and we blow through it, and then it's another person's turn. And I think it's a really good idea to do that. It kind of loosens up the pressure on lots of conflicts, or every conflict or every scene having a conflict. It allows plot, to clip along, and it allows just kind of glance and lots of raw material for the next person who's making a scene, because they've got all these things kind of going on or having just happened. And I really think I'm going to emphasize that. So, okay, that was a lot of time spent on all that stuff. I didn't really mean to do that. What are some of the other rules-ish-y things? Well, we should point out that since these are proper episodes now, that we have a differing profiles of screen presence. And this one is real neat because we have Sam with a screen presence of 2, and we've got everyone else at 1. And one thing I didn't do during play last time, I flipped in the book and I found actually the wrong part. I mean, it was right for its own purposes, but it wasn't what I needed. There is a slightly better section on, well, when your screen presence is X, what do you do? So I'm going to review that briefly with the players as well, so they can say, well, I have a 1, so that's kind of where I'm at. So just because your screen presence is 1, though, doesn't mean that you can't. For example, let's say I'm playing someone and I'm not Helma, and so I'm not playing Sam. I could very easily say, well, I'm here and I'm doing this, and meanwhile, Sam is here too, and somebody's chewing her out, and he's scolding her about something, and they specify a little bit about that. So there they are. It's their turn. They've framed their protagonist into the situation, but they've effectively set up the focus, the attention on Sam. So that's very, very important, very useful to consider. With all this happening, what is my budget? Well, it's very, very low. It's almost at the minimum, of course, with that screen presence layout, which is at 13. And I have to, basically throw cards into conflicts. And I'm inclined to go big early. To really get, oh, wow, that's harsh. That's a savage, outcome. When you have more cards in the conflict, not only is more literally going on in the fiction, but it has a tendency, for better or for worse, for people to say, wow, that was big-ish, and it has a bigger impact on what's going on. That's not built into the system, but it's an intuitive effect that is neither good nor bad. Just something to keep in mind for me when I'm saying in the beginning conflict or 2. Speaking right now hypothetically, I have no idea until I get there, but I'm at least inclined to think about going big into those early conflicts with only 13 cards. I want to see what happens when we crest, and I'm the one sucking wind, and they're the ones with all the audience pool. So there's that. I'm looking at Sam's information, and we see the character Kara, whom I know nothing about, and I mean nothing. I'm going to ask Helma a little bit, but only enough so that I can kind of seize the character and, do stuff with them that I like to play. The issue, of course, is self-worth. That's why I mentioned that whole scolding thing. And I can work a little bit off of the pilot's content, but I also want to not treat the pilot as, where we started our story necessarily. I want to be able to kind of dip into the pilot content when and if we feel like only. That kind of goes with Sandra's thing that I really like about, well, and I like it when nothing happens. The point is that when we do have things like save the ship or stuff like that, or anything kind of big and gaudy, or, oh no, this corporation has, hacked the information system of the ship, whatever. It's not the goal of play to fix that. The sim, I'm going for a little bit of episodic here, a little bit instead of Swiss watch arc. Just in the sense that, well, these things come and go. We work the lower decks, right? We bust our butts. We don't run around, being the heroes in big exceptional situations. Somebody's doing that shit. So anyway, I'm kind of liking that. So talk a little bit about crossing, including characters. Obviously, I'm going to allow people to do a little revision. I've been talking about that the whole time. They look at their connections or traits and say, we got all these family members everywhere. Do we really want all these to be, what we're about? Stuff like that. Now, what else do I have here? That going with the fictional content is a big deal. I'd like to emphasize to everybody that this is not a generation ship, nor is it interstellar. That this is it does circuits around places across the solar system. And while it is a long-term job, I mean, you're in it for years, living on this ship, it is a job. And people might do one tour or whatever it is we call that circuit. And then, their contract's over and they just don't come back. They did their stint. Another person might be kind of a lifer and just keep recontracting or have some longer term career oriented with this specific ship. So we have some intimation that, family and rank structure are sort of involved here. The point is that we don't have to get into this notion of generation ships or of interstellar travel, keeping it kind of prosaic and work contract oriented is more in line with what we're doing. In my thinking, and here you'll see a little bit of influence from Battlestar Galactica, is the low-tech aspect of it all. You may have noticed that I described literally no fancy tech. In fact, the show might even have, in my mind anyway, it might even have a tinge of kind of inappropriately contemporary tech in it, as opposed to, being the latest and greatest of that particular century. And I don't mind a slight anachronistic feel. Shouldn't that be advanced by now? Computers change from their state in the 70s to the state in 2020. If we're 50 years later than that, wouldn't they have changed as much into some damn thing, much different? I don't care. I really like the idea of low tech involved. Having just rewatched the original Alien movie with my daughter, it's one thing I just absolutely loved about it. The absolutely, if you make coffee, you got to make coffee. Feel. I mean, yeah, we have these pods that we were suspended in, but once they open and close, fine. Now how do you make toast? With a toaster. And I'm kind of going for that feel for as much of this as I possibly can. Now, so that leads us to sets and personal sets. We didn't talk about that at all, and that's fine. Now is a great time for the players to look across their characters and say, "Oh, I want this." This location. That leads me also to a point that we didn't clarify during play. It came up in one instance. I do think that the player characters should already know each other, given everything else that we have going on and the necessarily diffused events across the ship and their workplaces, that it makes a lot of sense for them to know each other personally enough to know each other's name and know how to get in touch with each other and stuff like that. Maybe no better or no worse than they know anyone else. But certainly they're not, strangers. We don't have to do how we met. People who know me know that I am heartily sick of how we met unless it has a specifically important role in the nature of that exact game. Well, anyway, What else do I have here? Few interesting points. Yes, the producer starts the first scene in each setting. I didn't do that during the pilot because one of the players was, feisty and inspired, and there was absolutely no reason to override that. So theoretically, I should start the first scene. Then everybody else gets scenes of their own to make, and then it comes back to me, if you will, and then we do that over again. Who knows? Maybe I'm just a player like the others, so once we do that first round of scenes, then maybe I don't have to be necessarily the signal that we're in a new phase. Maybe I'm just I'm one with the gang in terms of ordering after that. I suspect that we'll hit upon that, functionally case by case as we go along. What else? I think that's about it. That's what I have in mind. Just a little bit more about the content. Clearly, as you can see, I'm thinking of putting some attention on Sam's situation since it's not a spotlight episode. It's more of an illustrating the kind of things that she has to deal with, both logistically, just as part of the job, to some small extent, perhaps as fallout from the pilot, which is where her character, encountered some adversity. And I certainly would like the idea that she has those funky drugs that she picked up from the scary market back in Moonville. Helma made absolutely certain to narrate that she, hung on to those inadvertently. No, that's just like, oh, whoop whoop, do something with me. And then the other thing that I wanted to focus on was this whole issue business of self-worth. So she is definitely, I at least will have in mind that the situations that she's in or the characters that I play in them will all call attention to positive or negative senses of worth about her as they see it. And then that's it. That's what I got. I don't even have the plan for what kind of, what am I going to introduce? What conflict am I going to call? Nothing. I'm going to go over those issues, those procedural issues with the players, and we are going to play that. We'll see what the conflicts turn into. Little bit of discussion too about, backstory authority and content authority, stuff like that. With all that clarified, or at least nodded to and addressed in play if necessary, I think we've got something good coming up.